Peace and blessings to the family. This is your brother, your host, Afro-Descendant Ali. Welcome back to the Angel Network 1930. Salute to everyone that is checking in on the live stream and everyone that will be checking in as this is posted. Please support the channel. We have been demonetized, so please support the Cash App. Excuse me, at the bottom right hand corner of your screen. Today, I just wanted to bring this forward because we are pretty much in a state of emergency as a people, globally and in the United States of America. As you can see from the thumbnail, the end of the black middle class. This is an article brought forward by Antonio Moore of ADOS, a brother who is really strong in the economics and sociology of the situation. And just wanted to show you a lot of these images. This is mainly for Gen X. You remember growing up seeing all these black images on magazines, on television. This was black aspiration to its fullest. And I wanted to specifically call out the images from the 70s and the 80s for that particular generation. Because many of us, a majority of us, are old enough to know that a lot of these images kind of failed us. The America that the periodicals and the marketing and the advertisements were failing us and have failed us miserably. And we've had enough of a snapshot to see that this just didn't work. This America for black people never really manifested en masse for us. And I just wanted to take this time to show you these images and the thousands of others that came during that time, let alone the ones that came in the 90s and the 2000s, but this never really materialized for us. As we can see from the Trump cuts, they are gutting the workforce at Social Security and the United States Postal Service, in addition to a lot of other essential services that black people rely on heavily. And to highlight some of the dire situation here that we have in America, we have to go through a few of these things. So let's check back in with Antonio's article. And to highlight some of the article, the myth versus the reality of black middle class, there essentially is no black middle class in the United States. There has never been. This has been a lie. I have done an interview with Dr. Jared Ball of Morgan State University over on the Transatlantic channel, and he highlighted that that was just a marketing ploy to make black people consumers overall. In his phenomenal work, The Myth of Black Buying Power, if you haven't checked it out, check out Dr. Jared Ball on I Mix What I Like. I Mix What I Like, Dr. Jared Ball, Jared. He does great work called The Myth of Black Buying Power. In this premise that black people have all of this buying power, they would be this ranked number richest people in the world, and that's just not the case. Now, as far as the existence of a black middle class, it's often exaggerated. It's really masking systemic inequalities. While some black households have achieved middle class incomes, they lack the wealth, security, and intergenerational stability of their white counterparts. Racial disparities in wealth, home ownership, and access to resources undermine the notion of a durable black middle class. And here's the contrast: wealth versus income. Black middle class households have 1/10 the median wealth of white middle class families due to historical discrimination such as redlining and wage gaps, and limited generational wealth transfers. Income parity does not equate to economic equality. So if you're a black person, you make $100,000 a year by yourself or as a family versus a white family who makes the same amount, it's not the same because there are other factors that draw on that person's salary in itself, which is basically income. Black families are more likely to fall out of the middle class after financial shocks such as job loss and medical crises. So, as we can see, just because the income is good and it seems as if black people are winning because of income alone, this is stating that black people cannot absorb catastrophic events, such as if someone gets cancer and they have to undergo a sustained period of treatment where they can't work or their income is impacted, etc. They can't absorb that. And once they can't absorb that, once they are able to get back into the workflow with the income, because the catastrophic event was such a draw on their resources, they're not able to recover because they're paying today for the catastrophic event for yesterday. Even in another case scenario where someone loses a job for any sustained period of time, whether it be 1 week, 2 weeks, we can't sustain a catastrophic event, a serious event, such as a health crisis or a job loss, because we have incurred so many bills during the period in which the income was not coming in. Once we are able to get on our feet, we have to then go back and pay that. So we're not in the present moment able to put anything towards savings on that. And this is just as a result of the environment that we have to live in within the United States. We see in many cases such as catastrophic events such as the weather occurrences, where people lose their home, black people lose their homes. Anytime you have to take off of work, that puts your job in jeopardy, that puts your salary in jeopardy, that puts your income in jeopardy, that puts your future plans in jeopardy. Structural barriers to economic security. You have systemic racism. Persistent discrimination in housing, lending, and hiring perpetuates economic fragility. For example, black homeowners face lower property valuations in majority black neighborhoods. So if you buy a home, let's say at $150,000, 3 years down the line, you go to sell that home, yeah, the house might be worth $350,000, but most people are going to, the property evaluators are going to lowball you and set that home at maybe $275,000 to $300,000. So as a result, you're not getting the full value of the house, which detracts from everything else that you can do. Yes, you have made money over the amount that you paid originally on the home, but you're still not getting the full value of the home. And during that period of time, as the value of the home went up, and you get the amount over the amount that you paid for the home, you have been lowballed, so therefore the inflation of everything else goes into what you have lost. in the low valuation of the home. Overrepresentation in unstable, non-unionized jobs, and underrepresentation in high-wage sectors such as tech, finance, which also limits wealth building. Now, this goes into more of the income, but yeah, if you're in a situation where you're an Amazon worker, you work at the local supermarket, you work in a warehouse, or even at a hotel in any various capacity, if those are not unionized jobs, those people can get rid of you for any number of reasons, whether it's downsizing or they want to bring people in at a lower wage cost. We don't live the lifestyle to be able to absorb those job cuts and then those low wages for the most part. We're living paycheck to paycheck. So this drives into the struggle that we have in America for the most part. Debt and asset gaps. Black middle class families carry higher debt burdens, student loans, predatory lending, and are less likely to inherit wealth. So here's where the crux of everything lies in America, where we have been lied to for the most part. You take black child X that grows up in anywhere America. They are proselytized and inundated with what they must do to succeed in society. The first thing is they are told to go to school, get an education, go to the highest levels of education. Now, in a generic sense, that actually works. But for black people, that doesn't work. It's an anomaly. Not saying you shouldn't go to school. Not saying you shouldn't get an education. Get an education. But here you must know where you are not the same as other people in America in general. Now, you might get the one person, so, well, I inherited something. I went to school on a full scholarship, right? My credit is good, so I'm not subject to predatory lending. However, that's not the general rule for black people in America. Kudos to you if this doesn't impact you on an individual level. But if we're being honest, and remember, let's go back to the imagery here. This is more for Gen X, right? Those that are like 60 to 45 to 60 years old in America. You know what these images mean if you grew up in America. You understand what these images mean. You know what they were selling to you when they sold these images. I know I did, and I'm 50. Now, why this factor of debt and asset gaps when we're talking about someone going to school, getting an education, right? So black child X graduates high school with high grades, high SAT score. They go to college and university. Normally what happens, that student incurs student loans. And those student loans, most of the time, in many cases, they draw out for 20 years. So say you graduated an average of 22 years old, you finished paying student loans at around the age of 42 years old. You were a whole entirely different person by that point. And for black people, that's if you got a job in the field that you graduated in, right? But okay, the higher you go, the more student loans you incur. That means you have your master's degree, you have your PhD level, MD level, however far you go after bachelor's, right? So in those cases, you got people that incur debt of $100,000. Well, you say, well, if you go that high, you are making $150,000 a year. You can pay off that $100,000 in no time, but you haven't taken into consideration the mortgage, the car note, the insurance, the incidentals that come with that. So you're only really able to pay a fraction of a percentage on these student loans. So you're drawn out over the entire course of the term of the loan repayment plan. So here's what happens in majority of other households. For white people, in most cases, your black child has to compete with those same white young people, children, what have you. How can you compete if you have student loans with someone who has no student loans because their parent paid for the entirety of the 4 years of college or university? You can't compete. How can you compete in a workforce? Yes, as a black person, I have the same salary as a white person, but I have 6 figures in student loan debt versus the white person who has 0 student loan debt. To include the fact that that white person also received an inheritance, right, through generational wealth, right, and I received nothing. So black people find themselves in this cycle where every person born is pretty much starting from 0, when everyone else gets to stack in every subsequent generation. So one generation accumulates this amount, forwards that to the next generation, third generation gets another amount. We come down to this generation. Now all of that wealth going back 4 or 5 generations has stacked and accumulated and come to you, whereas black people start from 0 in every subsequent generation. Hope everyone can hear me here. Let me check in with the chat. Salute to the family. All right, so here we go. So here we are, no real black middle class in America, and this is one of the key things as it relates to black middle class, because we're sold this bill of goods as far as go to school, right? We saw the different world, we saw the Cosby Show, and we followed that trajectory, right? Hillman College, HBCUs, what have you. We went there, pledged to fraternities, and thought everything was going to be all good, right? We took up degrees like communication, social worker, etc., things like that, and we're still not cutting it. We still find ourselves in the same spaces in the hood as everyone else who just got high school diplomas for the most part. Not saying people should flee from the hood, but you just find yourself in a similar situation. So this particular part where black middle class families carry higher debt burdens. So which says that if you're black and middle class, you basically can't live the American dream. You have to live in an alternate universe from every other group of people in the country, because our situation is basically different, right? So you can't enjoy the things that people enjoy who don't have debt for the most part, which includes all of the Las Vegas vacations. Not saying you shouldn't do that, but these are things that you must keep in mind for the most part. That our situation is a little different. Well, you have the money, yeah, we have the money, but we have to compensate for the debt burdens that we carry, the student loans, the fact that you're paying 21% interest on your car note, things of that nature. The homeownership rates for black families lag far behind white families. So that's at about 44% for black families, and white families it's 74%. A legacy of racist policies like redlining and subprime targeting. So in the early 2000s, you had a situation where black people found themselves underwater in the home. So they were sold a home, and in many cases this started with Bill Clinton, where once upon a time prior to Bill Clinton, you had to pay about 20%, at least minimum 20% down payment on your home. Now Bill Clinton and the regulation, and I forget the regulation that he repealed on that, it'll come to me at some point, where they repealed the lending requirements on I know especially with houses and cars in the late 90s. And you saw and again, this is why this is, let's go back to the slideshow. This is for this generation that remembers these images, right? The Gen X people, the 45 to 65-year-olds who were becoming adults in the late 90s. You remember in the late 90s when people were getting houses with zero down payment, all they had to do was cover closing costs, right? And people were driving around in Lexuses and design and luxury cars in the late 90s with zero money down. That's because Bill Clinton, your first black president, allowed you to have these loans at zero money down. So black people were like, this is a good thing. All of a sudden, back in the day, you used to say in the 80s, for Mercedes Benz and BMWs were the epitome of luxury cars in those days. So a doctor, a lawyer, a drug dealer were the only people that had those cars. But all of a sudden in the late 90s, you saw school teachers with Lexuses, right? You saw postal workers with Acuras. That's because Bill Clinton repealed financial regulation that enabled these types of things. They opened the floodgates and allowed black people to have all types of things with little to no money down, pretty much leveraging your future with these things. So pretty much black people were able to access these luxury items. Not saying a house is a luxury item, but a house was one of them. I'll never forget, I was working at a furniture warehouse in Baltimore, and the guys were getting houses. And I would look at my salary like, how are these people affording houses? I wasn't really aware that the banks had really opened up like that. I was happy for them at the time, but I really didn't understand. I thought I was lacking somewhere. But, these guys were doing it. But that's because they were able to relax a lot of the financial requirements because Bill Clinton repealed the financial regulations. And this is what opened up a lot of what they call subprime targeting. So subprime targeting is that, okay, although the financial regulations have been relaxed, no sensible bank is going to give someone with bad credit a mortgage, right? But if you have some unsavory characters, unsavory financial institutions, they'll say, okay, I will take the risk on you, right? But you are going to have to give me a pint of blood for this house with no money down. In other words, a normal bank with someone with 20% down and good credit, say your mortgage would have been $500. Well, if you give us $800 or $1,000, we'll give you this house because we know you really want a house. And black people don't have a house. And a lot of these lenders hired black mortgage agents selling this to black people. So this happened for about a period of 10 years. I think the regulation that Bill Clinton repealed was in 1996. So this culminated in the financial disaster of 2008 with AIG and Lehman Brothers, because they were trading your mortgages. So they got a good number of black people to take these mortgages, and they were doing some type of scheme where they were making more money on the mortgage, and then people were betting that you would fail in your mortgage, right? So they were monetizing this on Wall Street. And what happened is that this created a bubble, a subprime bubble, because what happened is some people got savvy in this and they were like, okay, you're going to give me a house? That's when you saw all those schemes where people like no money down, flip houses, people getting 20,000 at a time, 50,000 at a time, 10 stacks at one time. It was almost like people were reforming themselves real time. It was like people were drug dealers in the 90s, hustlers in the 90s, and then all of a sudden they were mortgage agents in the late 90s, early 2000s. You're like, man, this guy's a winner. He was a hustler in the 90s, making money. Now he's a mortgage agent, but mostly these subprime, right, loans, predatory loans, right? So it's still you're a predator if you're a drug dealer, you're a predator if you're a mortgage agent with subprime predatory lending. Either way, black people are victims, and they would use black people as middlemen in these cases. So, excuse me. So we saw a situation where those black people took those loans, but they took the loans. So if the house was worth $100,000, after you paid the interest on it, maybe that house was $300,000. So after 2008, when we saw the financial disaster that occurred with large insurance companies and brokerage firms in 2008, but we saw that black people were ended up upside down in those homes. What do I mean by upside down in those homes? That means those people couldn't sell those homes. If you have a $150,000 house and the value of the house went up to $250,000, but you still owe $300,000 on the home, you're in a situation where you still owe the bank $50,000. So even if you sold the home, you're still in debt and still tied to the house. So a lot of people ended up not selling their homes, and they had to stay in those homes. And in the cases where people didn't, if they were at least paying their mortgage, they were in a situation where they just owed the amount to the initial bank that gave you the predatory loan in the first place. But in a lot of cases, people owed more because there were also predatory practices of refinancing. So you knew people that the moment that they had some money available via refinancing, it was just a way to get a bump every few years. So people would end up refinancing every 2 years just to get a $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 bump to catch up on the previous 3 years. Because as you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're paying your mortgage, you're paying your bill, you're doing a responsible thing. The kids need this, the wife needs that, the family needs this breaks, that breaks. You pretty much see that there's nothing left at the end of the day. And as a matter of fact, you still start going into the red because the amount that's coming in doesn't equate to the amount that's actually going out. So you found black people in this endless cycle of refinancing. The moment a little bit of money came available, they would just be checking, all right, dude, how much money can I get? Maybe if I hold out a little more, I could get 20,000. If I hold out a little more, I get 50,000. So people were in the endless cycle of refinancing their homes, getting a little bump to throw something on it, to get the roof fixed, to get the plumbing right, to repaint, just to try. Black people were really trying. I can't really say black people were trifling at all. Black people were really trying. Now, there was some slackness in there where people were doing a little bit excessive, but that just wasn't the case for the majority of black people were really trying to stay ahead. So people, and then people will say, oh, they're stupid. I wouldn't. You don't understand a person's individual. Like if the roof has been leaking for the last 6 months, you have kids in there, you have a risk of mold. Like you have to refinance the house to take that loan out to pay that money to get the roof fixed. Like, your house is your house. There's a lot of things that must be done, let alone, again, the catastrophic incidents, right? So now you got, as a side note, now you got Aflac showing up everywhere for black people. Now you got anytime they start recruiting black agents, please just watch out, because they really want to target you. I've been an insurance agent. So in those situations, you see now you have Aflac coming in trying to compensate because these refinancing options are not available for black people, etc., etc. So back to this this housing bubble. So what happened in that 12 years when the financial regulation was repealed in 1996 to 2008? Those that got in on the bus early, they really thrived because they were on the refinancing game. You saw people move up in housing 3 times, 2 and 3 times, especially those that came in the mid to late 90s. You saw people, their first house was $120,000, then maybe 18 months later, the house was worth $250,000. So they would get the money from the first house, get another house worth like $300,000, $400,000, put the down payment on that, and move in. Like, people were really doing it, that were really savvy and on their game and really taking advantage. So you had this infinite increase in valuation on the properties that they were buying. So for that 12-year period, and even as it does now, and looks like we're headed into another bubble, the value of houses was increasing. So if you got in late in the game, say 2006, 2007, you were really screwed when 2008 hit, because you're paying the highest value for the houses before the prices went back down. So say you bought that house for $250,000, right, in 2006, 2007, and then after 2008, that house went to down to like $175,000, but you bought the house at the time for $250,000, and a year later, 2 years later, the house is only worth $175,000. You found a lot of black people in that situation also. So you're talking about, again, let's go back to the imagery. You remember this image, Gen X, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, all these smiling black faces on Ebony, Jet, Essence magazine, this American dream that a lot of us didn't see except for on TV for the most part. These beautiful black people. It never materialized. We were coming of age during that time. And if you understand anything about intelligence and covert war operations, 99% of war is not bullets, tanks, and bombs. 99% of war is administrative. It's soft. This is the type of thing that was done against our generation as we were entering into the workforce. So they are pretty much starting us off behind the 8 ball in this situation. So for Gen X, majority of us were never having access to the same middle class dreams that our parents had when their houses were only $12,000 in the 60s and 70s. Now let's continue on, because I got a lot to cover here. We definitely want to keep in mind that a lot of this is a PSYOP, black operations war that's being waged against black people, that we have pretty much been lied to in America. And it's for the generation that saw these images here that must start to beat the drums, because this is an absolute state of emergency for our people. And this can't continue, because at this point the young people are really struggling out there. And the opportunities that we even had as Gen Xers, when we were young, if you didn't finish high school, you had options. You could go down to, if you came of age in the 90s, right? Late 80s, you could at least go down to the post office. You could at least go down to the telecom company, right? The Bell Atlantics, Bell South, wherever, the little phone company back in the day. And you had a nice little career. I knew some people that were actually dropping out of college because they started working for the phone company. It was like, shoot. Yeah, back then, $25,000, $30,000 was a lot of money. You could raise a family on that. And those people stayed on. They started at 18. They could retire after about 25, 30 years with a nice little package. Go sell Amway for the rest of your life, right? You buy a house back then, maybe $75,000, $100,000. You paid it off. If you were diligent and prudent, those people are good. Not everybody did that, but there were still those opportunities for Gen X, as we were coming of age. Now, those opportunities are not available. When we came of age, America was pretty much just black and white. There wasn't a whole lot of Indians. There weren't a whole lot of Asians. In most places, there weren't a whole lot of Latinos either. The world was just mostly black and white. And if they were there, others, they were in a small percentage. Now you got to compete with all these other groups. I'm not here because it's Antonio Moore. I'm not here to knock other groups. It is what it is. The world does evolve. The world changes. We're talking about competition. So now you have young people coming of age. They have competition. And they have to compete with economically prudent Asian people, economically prudent Latino people who can live 20 in a house. You see these houses, I know in Maryland, right? You see these houses in University Heights, right? Tacoma Park, Langley Park, right? You see these houses have 20 people living there, and they got these big pickup trucks, right? Because they're living financially prudent. You eat your beans and rice on a regular basis. 20 people in the house. You got your ingrained daycare center, your ingrained chef. So all you got to do is sleep, work, and eat. That's it. All right, no other things to do. Just sleep, work, and eat. They live a communal lifestyle that supports them and helps them to win in America. Black people in America, not so much. And that's to include black immigrants. Because black immigrants generally don't live a communal lifestyle either. They come in and fall in and become individualistic minded. So now black people have to compete with economically prudent people. Young black people, again, they don't have the same opportunities as Gen X did, young people. So you must keep that in mind. Vulnerability to economic shocks. This is a big one. So most of the time, it's always the old adage is black people, America in general, doesn't have enough money saved up, or they don't have $100 that they can put their hands on right away. So there's a lack of safety nets. Black middle class households are disproportionately affected by recessions, pandemics, and inflation due to fewer financial buffers such as savings and investments. Again, this is not black people's fault. You get a lot of people that hammer these points home saying, well, black people don't save, black people don't buy, black people buy Jordans, they buy things they don't need. It's like, some black people are like, look, I might as well look good because at the end of the day, nobody gave me anything. So that will put me in a position to save in the first place. Well, if you could at least save $5, that's fine, well and good too. But you have black people that actually have tried to be financially prudent, and the minute you get a sizable amount in savings, here comes the catastrophic event, right? So the catastrophic event puts you at zero. And it seems like those things start to come as exponentially. So even when you do get a situation where you can pay something down, here comes something that takes the money away again, and those things almost come back to back, and you're all of a sudden you're out of the black and into the red. We just can't absorb catastrophic events. And this is something that even white people know. If you work for any and you work at any with any economists or listen to any economists, that's actually built in. Catastrophic events are things that happen. Those things just can't be avoided. They can happen any given Sunday, any given moment. Car crash, you just going to the store, here's a car crash. You just go out, do something, someone has a stroke, heart attack. Something happens, a weather occurrence, your roof gets blown off. Those things you need $2,500, $5,000 a pop. And if the insurance takes its time, the roof is leaking, the insurance hasn't paid, you must come out of pocket for that. So even by the time the insurance decides to pay, you're still at a deficit because you went without for so long, and the insurance came back to you, replaced that amount, but you have lost interest on that money that you already had to pay out. We just can't absorb catastrophic events in America and still come out whole. You saw with COVID. COVID has erased decades of black wealth gains, highlighting the fragility of progress. You're talking about the hurricane of COVID-19. Hurricane is a day. Now, the long-term impacts may be months down the line, right? You're like, well, the roof was blown off in February, it's June, we're just getting it fixed. People are still gathering themselves from COVID, for the most part. It's like people are still recovering. It started 5 years ago, and here we are 5 years later. Educationally, black students are just recovering or still dealing with COVID. The fragility of our progress, it's empty. The scale that it would take to re-educate black people on what that is. It will take 2 generations to do so. That is not something you can get into the head as a practice of black people overnight or in a year or in a 4-year university course. 2 generations. 1 generation is 20 years. We're talking about 40 years. This is why reparations is necessary. If you boil it down, if you're boiling reparations down to slavery, you're making a big mistake. What I'm talking about here, is the devil in the details. Systemic racism built in the system, right? So you can't point to black person X. Well, look at that black person. They have a good job. They have a good career. When someone says that, I know automatically they don't know what they're talking about. And they're probably racist at the end of the day. Because a good job and a high paying salary alone is not an indicator of success. Because jobs are fleeting. So if you have no control over that job and that job decides to downsize you, what does ever having that good job serve you going into the future? Right? So here we go. Intergenerational instability. Limited wealth transfers force black families to rely on debt for milestones like education, perpetuating cycles of financial insecurity. We're not even talking about the predatory credit card that are given to students. That's light work. Because I know when I was in school, they would give you like $100, which was a lot of money. So I don't know what they're giving these kids today, but either way, they're not giving them like $20,000 credit loans. right? We're talking about where they do get $20,000 credit lines is with those student loans. So again, as I stated before, you graduate at 22. The payment terms for the student loans, you'll be 42 after 20 years of payments, a whole different person, right? Regretting that you even took out the student loan in the first place, because 35-year-old you and 22-year-old you, or 18-year-old you when you first took out the loan, are two different people. You've been grown and evolved into an entirely different person. And in a lot of cases, black people are graduating in fields that they never actually end up working in, right? So they end up working in a field that requires a bachelor's degree, but not necessarily a bachelor's degree, and a degree in a field that you actually got a degree in. So people are taking out these loans and pretty much staying on the hamster wheel just to pay off these loans, right? Just to be able to live another day so you don't have bad credit or go into default. Just so you can try to get a loan to build a house, have credit good enough to have a loan to buy a house, have a loan to buy a car, have a loan to be able to get married, have a loan to be able to have children. Your whole life is borrowed. And this is not a euphemism when people actually say that slavery is still in effect. This is a new way of people being required to work to pay off the loans. If I give you a loan, this guarantees that you will give labor. Because as long as you have this debt, you must work to pay off the debt. You just can't not work. And then you just make the mechanisms within the system, you turn up the dial to make sure you're never out of the loop. So you must work, you must get up, you must stay at work, right? Half the time I know black people, like, they're not morning people. For the most part, don't even understand why they have to get up and go to work most of the time. Sometimes you go to these jobs, you gotta leave black people alone until lunchtime. Because they ain't feeling this shit at all. Don't even understand why. Because you have to stay on the hamster wheel to pay off these loans. That's slavery. You're being forced to work. Well, that's an individual decision to do so. Well, if you told me I have to go and have this education, and the only way I could afford to go to State U was take out this loan because I couldn't afford it any other way, and now I have to work to pay off those loans, well, you shouldn't have gone to school. They told me to do it. That's the only thing I was supposed to do. I was 18, right? So most people did that. And now they incurred 6 figures, 5 figures in loans, and they're stuck on the hamster wheel. And black educated people are some of the most miserable at the workplace because of this, and don't even know. We need psychological evaluations. Can't even understand why we hate life most of the time. Cranky as hell. Black children of middle-class parents are less likely to remain middle-class as adults compared to white children. That's a big one, too. So you have one generation, black middle-class, right? 2-parent household, car in the garage, dog, white picket fence. I said mom and dad, everyone smiling, great Christmases, great Thanksgivings, prom, all the good stuff. But they're saying that generation that grew up in that house, the children that grew up in that house, are less likely to remain in the middle class, right? So we see that a lot with the generation that's older than 60. You had those that could do that. But then when it came to my generation and younger generations, they didn't stay in that situation. Maybe one or two of the children, but you kind of everybody else out of the cousins and the other brothers and sisters, it's kind of a hodgepodge, right? You got one who's a drug addict, one who's a single parent, one who's gay, one who's, did I say drugs? Drugs. Just this hodgepodge of, they make comedy parodies of it now, right? Where you got the cousin that's this, the cousin that's that, the cousin that's this. You don't have a homogenous generation, right? You just have a hodgepodge of things. One or two are successful, but Big Mama, and Pop, grandfather and grandmother, they don't have, they're not repeating what the previous generations had. Stability, for the most part. So, again, black children of black middle income parents are less likely to remain middle class as adults compared to white children. So in that case also, we saw and one thing that I saw on a personal level in a place like Baltimore, right? When I moved to Baltimore, now I thought in New York City I had seen some drug addiction. My father was drug addicted. I thought I saw that, but I didn't see it. I thought I saw it. When I got to Baltimore, I was like, oh, I ain't seen nothing. So I had a few friends, right, that were people that got high, or had friends who had relatives of people that got high. I'm talking about high, bad high. I'm talking about crack, heroin, lived on the streets, smelled bad, looked bad, skin bad. High, that high, not casual, but high, right? And then you look at some of these people and you're like, these people came from good homes, middle class homes. Their parents owned nice, clean houses, good, upstanding citizens. Even a majority of these people that were getting high in Baltimore came from good homes. You're like, how did this happen? I lived in Park Heights, Baltimore, and I remember there was this lady that lived on the block. She was a lady who was drunk all the time. Her name was Sassy. And that sister Sassy, but she was very polite. Like, she would always greet respectfully, but she was always drunk. So I didn't have a problem with Sassy. So, I actually, I respected the fact that she was so respectful. But Sassy ended up dying. And I looked up Sassy's obituary. Sassy had graduated from Georgetown University. This is exactly exemplary of black middle class, black children of middle class parents are less likely to remain middle class as adults compared to white children. Now, the crux in all of this is that people will come in and say, well, that's your fault. That's fine. You can say that, and there's a little bit of truth into that. But at the end of the day, when you constantly have to fight against systemic barriers, how much fight will you have left with it inside of you? Right? If it's for an immigrant family to come to America, all they have to do is work hard. Work hard. Work hard. That's the thing that's rammed down our throats with regard to people. Those people have no credit debt, right? Literally, all they have to do is work hard. No one is going to put any tripwires in their way to discourage them from continuing to work hard and achieving and pursuing. But yet, black people have all of these things. And matter of fact, most of them are inheriting debt at this point from their parents, from their grandparents, constant tripwires. So you have to do double and triple the amount of work. Like the things that I personally had to do just to be able to save money will make your head spin. There were days I would have to have 2 and 3 jobs. Literally, I had to sacrifice having a family and children. Well, that's what you should do. Then why should I do that if everyone else gets to have what they want when they want it, and all they have to do is work hard, right? Why do I have to have 2 and 3 jobs and then have additional sacrifices to make on top of that? Are you serious? Are you kidding me? But I did it anyway. Still had to jump through hoops, right? Some days just, okay, I'm going to eat rice and beans, right? I'm going to cook it, put it away, and not eat out. But I don't see everybody else doing that. Why do I have to do that? So I always say that black people in America pay a premium for basic services, and everyone else gets premium services for a basic price. Let me say that again. Black people in America pay premium price for basic services, while everybody else pays basic price for premium services. They get to have families. Yeah, they work hard, but they get to have families. They get to enjoy a human life as decent people. But here we are. We get constant tripwires placed in front of us. And if you saw my last video with regard to the JFK files, let's talk about CIA intelligence, right? I'm not going to get that deep on this call. We're going to keep it on the economic scale of everyday lives of black people. And we've been sold a bad bill of goods, but we're talking about on a domestic policy level coming from the White House. Like, black people must really understand this. And this is, again, let's go back to the slideshow here. The Black Gen X, here are the images that they sold you. And I really hope one day, we don't have enough scholars like Wesley Muhammad, like Dr. Wesley Muhammad, like Dr. Jared Ball, that really dig into the lives of black people in the interests of black people. Most of the black scholars, they work for these corporations, and they don't do any research to give us the nitty-gritty details on what's really going on with us, right? So we end up with a lot of charlatans because no one is doing the real scholarly academic work to let us know what's really going on, to run the numbers, right? And I hope one day we really find out what was behind all of this that we were sold. Because what we see today, 40 and 30 and 50 years later, is not applicable to us in 2025. What happened to these people? Where's the promise that we got from these pictures here? Brother, who hurt you? Why are you so angry? Alright, let's continue here. The middle class never existed. The closest thing I saw to middle class was Prince George's County, Maryland, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and early 2000s. And that's slowly going away. Part of it is becoming Central and South America. The other part is becoming lower income poverty, right? When I got to Maryland in the early 90s, I was blown away by all the black people that had houses in Prince George's County, Maryland. And I understand Atlanta has neighborhoods like that, and Houston has black neighborhoods like that, or had. I don't know where they are today. If anyone knows, I hope to see it in the comments at some point. So intergenerational instability, where I saw that those black families in Prince George's County, it wasn't sustained, right? And in 2025, it's reduced to about 20% of what it was only just 30 years ago. Remember I said it takes 2 generations. 1 generation is 20 years, so 2 generations is 40 years. Here we go. We're in a 30-year cycle, and that was there before I got there. But anyway, political and policy failures here, the tripwires. Erosion of affirmative action. So, affirmative action in itself as a program was meant to give black people opportunities. Not really just give it to them, just because they're black, but because there were discriminatory practices in the workplace in the first place. So you find a black person that's qualified for the job, but a white person who is slightly less qualified for the job will actually get a job because they're white, right? So that's what affirmative action was put there to guarantee that qualified black people were actually getting those opportunities. This wasn't anybody giving anybody anything, right? As it's the misnomer of what affirmative action is. And the fact that it never actually became that because the narrative around it became they're giving it to people, right? And that was not the intention of affirmative action in the first place. Rollbacks of race-conscious policies, college admissions, hiring, threatened pathways to upward mobility for black professionals. Same situation. There were situations before a lot of these policies came into play, and then ultimately they were rolled back because the popular narrative around it is that black people were being given something. And God forbid America give black people something like they gave white people land, right? Yeah, they gave white people land off the boat, right? But that wasn't a problem. We had to build the country, we needed people, and we just wanted to build our country up, so we had to give these white immigrants land, thousands of acres of land, right? They all, at the end of the day, that was justifiable in giving it to them, right? Let alone all the corporate advantages that a lot of these companies get in the form of corporate welfare. It's okay, everything is justifiable when it's not black people, right? But when it's black people, all of the hemming and hawing and different things come up with relation to black people. So, again, a situation where white colleges were not admitting qualified black people because they were black, and then these policies had to be enacted in order to get the black people who were qualified in those positions, right? So somehow the narrative around it became, well, black people, they're giving it to them, right? So underqualified black people are actually getting into these jobs or getting into these universities. And that was just not the case with it. Underfunded public institution cuts to education, healthcare, and social services disproportionately harm communities, undermining middle class stability. Here we have a situation where what they do is the crime is committed first, right? And then they create the conditions in the environment to bring about the justification of the crime. So in the situation where you have a city, pick any city in America, that's at least 40% black, right? The crime in that you underfund the city first, regardless to the property taxes, regardless to the diligence that the black people are trying within their neighborhoods. And then you create the circumstances to justify the crime. So in this case, the justification of the underfunding of the city. So in a lot of cases, you do things like maybe build low-income housing, free housing in the area where there are homeowners. And then you drive the circumstances down within the neighborhood. So you have a hodgepodge of homeowners, and then you have low-income housing. Remind you, for people that have or live in low-income housing, they're tied to the system. So they are actually wards of the state, the responsibility of the state. So the state has placed these low-income people within our neighborhood. So they are forcing these black neighborhoods to become destabilized. So how many, I'm sure black people listening to this, and again, let's go back. I have to go back to these because I have to recall who this is for. This is for the Gen X people, right? Who know these images, who remember these images or images like this, 45 to 60 years old. Now, how many of you remember neighborhoods from the 70s and 80s that were nice neighborhoods? Compton, California, I'm talking to you. They were nice neighborhoods in the 70s and 80s that have bad reputations now. And I'm sure they have nice areas, parts of those places, but they don't have those reputations today, right? You talk to anybody that's in their 60s that are from Compton. I talked about two brothers from Compton, and they say, man, Compton was a nice place in the 60s, right? And then everybody from LA started coming out here. And then that's when it went down. And say, Baltimore, Randallstown, Woodlawn, right? Everybody from the city started moving out to Randallstown, Woodlawn. And this is what happened. Roosevelt, Long Island, everybody from the city started moving out there. And this is what happened. I'm sure that happened in any city. Shoot, that even happens in former black middle class areas in Africa, in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, right? You see the nice middle class areas of the 70s and 80s are slums in the 90s and 2000s. You're like, what happened up to the 2020s? You're like, was this a plan? That sounds like a plan to me. Yeah, Kanye West talking about, that sound like a, what do you say? That sound like a choice to me. Now what I just talked about, that sound like a plan to me. There's no way that there's a coincidence that all these things happen to black people over a period of time where their wealth is being eroded. So we have the situation where they create the narrative. They do the crime first and create the narrative. So they underfund the area. They underfund Baltimore, right? Create the circumstances to justify the underfunding. So now, when they go to say something, well, see, this what happens. It's a democratic city. This what happened. You got people. You got instability. You got a mess on your hands. So black people are left speechless. Like, well, we can't really say anything about this because that's really what it is. Not going back to the foundation of the fact that they were underfunded and they put these tripwires in place to get at black people. So this is where we are. America does not have a real middle class. And these are the images that they sold us, Gen X, 45 to 60-year-olds, that never really manifested. They tried to bring it up to date. They tried to put new faces on it with Diddy, Jay-Z, and Beyonce. But it just doesn't have the same luster as these Kyrie Irving's parents. No, I'm kidding. But this is how we remember it, right? Look at Rudy. We all wanted a little sister like Rudy, right? Janet Jackson and Todd Bridges. A lot of these people turned out to be tragedies, right? We thought this was pure, wholesome blackness. But a lot of these things turned out to be tragedies. And this article by Antonio Moore was written back in like 2017. We're in 2025, 8 years later. And we're on the cusp of that being accelerated because we're going to get into black wealth here. And they're starting to erode. This is war, family. This is war, right? accelerating of the process of the elimination and genocide of black people in America. Let's just talk about it, right? Like, let's not put any more band-aids on it. Let's not drink any more elixirs or apply any more ointments. Let's root this thing out. So the further erosion of the system, let me pause this here. The further erosion in the system for black people here has been accelerated with the advent of your boy, and I ain't no Democrat or Republican. I can do a whole video on Obama and Joe Biden, right? But the current incarnation of the devil, right? Donald Trump has further accelerated the process of the elimination of black people. Let's just call it what it is. We can't sugarcoat this anymore because this is an actual state of emergency here, right? Social Security Administration would cut up to 50% of its workforce. So let's talk about it here. And I don't know if my sound is working on this thing. I need to double check it here because yeah, it's working. So we know Social Security Administration, federal government as a whole, is just a place where black people have accumulated wealth in the last 60 years. Nice little retirement plans and income, and provided a source of growth for black people, right? It's a leg up for our people. And now Donald Trump is threatening to remove that. And I know for a fact in Baltimore they have a big Social Security Administration office building there, and most people that work there are black people. So let's go through these little videos and then we'll go through a few articles on this.
Team and other running sectors, so it would force a shutdown in order for the federal judge to further clarify what he meant. The judge's ruling was not as broad as the administrator is saying. However, due to the legal loophole that he found, he would essentially force the judge's hand and could jeopardize millions of Americans acting Social Security.
You're a fucking fraud. If you call them because you or your loved one lost their Social Security check and you're complaining about it, they don't want to hear shit.
Let's say Social Security didn't send out their checks this month. My mother-in-law, who's 94, she wouldn't call and complain. Mm-hmm. She just wouldn't. She'd think something got messed up, and she'll get it next month. Yeah. Mm-hmm. A fraudster always makes the loudest noise, screaming, yelling, and complaining.
That's Howard Lutnick, Trump's Secretary of Commerce, who, by the way, is a billionaire. So if his mother-in-law, who's 94 years old, misses one Social Security check, which I'm pretty sure she's not on no motherfucking Social Security, even if she was, this motherfucker could pay for her shit. But Trump and Doge, through Elon Musk, is trying to cut thousands of jobs through the Social Security Administration. And Social Security was already dealing with backlogs. And because of all these extra cuts in staff, employees are warning that the job cuts could worsen the services. Quote, the public is going to suffer terribly as a result of this, the source wrote to NPR. Local field offices will close, hold times will increase, and people will be sicker, hungry, and die when checks don't arrive or a disability hearing is delayed just 1 month too late. But remember, don't fucking call them because you're a fraudster if you complain.
So there we go. We got Social Security Administration. They're about to cut up to. We're just getting started. Donald Trump. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. Again, this is just the latest incarnation of the devil here. He just happens to be a Republican. I don't care. So here we are. The role of Social Security Administration and why black people should really pay attention to this, because again, this is where a lot of our existing income and wealth comes from today, right? So being a black worker at Social Security Administration, which is one agency of the federal government. Again, where black people are all the way through a lot of these federal agencies, but one of the biggest here by percentage. It's been a pathway to the middle class for a lot of black people. I know, especially in the East Coast area. Philadelphia, well, that's the IRS, but I know Maryland for a fact, and DC. Social Security Administration jobs have historically provided black Americans with stable, unionized federal employment, offering competitive wages, pensions, and health care benefits. And let me add, in addition, we're going to be doing something on the postal workers just after this. But you talk about even on in the city, right? The city and state jobs, especially public works, right? Either public works, sanitation, things like that. A lot of brothers in those jobs. MTA, if you live in a city with a strong mass transit, MARTA in Georgia, MTA in New York, Metro in DC, the T in Boston, are big employers of black people here. But we're talking about Social Security Administration and federal, mostly, that Donald Trump is making cuts to. Social Security Administration jobs have historically provided black Americans with stable, it's a check, a nice little check, with benefits, unionized federal employment, offering competitive wages, pensions, and healthcare benefits, right? So you go to the 7-Eleven, you see the brother with the shorts and dress shoes and dress socks, right, chilling, drinking his coffee with a few other buddies, and you're like, what are they doing? They are enjoying those nice little pensions that they got. They chilling. And Friday they're going to go down to the VFW and chill some more, right? Those are those pensions and healthcare benefits. These roles, example given, claim specialists, customer service, enabled upward mobility, home ownership, and intergenerational wealth building in black communities. So when Pop, that's been hanging in front of the 7-Eleven in his shorts and his dress socks and dress shoes and his, Cadillac, he's chilling. When he dies, because of his pension, you don't have to pay for his funeral. His body don't have to sit up there for 2 weeks while you wait to collect this funeral money. He is taken care of. He's good. And if he's married, the widow is going to be good until she dies. She's going to receive the benefits. That's the pathway. That's generational wealth. It's not when the husband dies, the wife has to go out and struggle and hustle till she dies. She's taken care of by him. That's the value of these jobs to our community. And when those things are taken out, intergenerational wealth is lost completely. Overrepresentation in the public sector. You go to them places, go down. I'm talking about any. This is Social Security Administration specifically. You talk about any state, local government. You see black people at the counter for the most part. I love to see it. And I know they have good jobs, and we're not knocking good jobs, but we're talking about the loss of these good jobs and the downstream impacts to black people. Black workers are disproportionately employed in federal agencies like the Social Security Administration compared to the private sector, where systemic racism often limits opportunities. Let's go back to this one here. So we talked about affirmative action and why affirmative action exists. It's not a handout to people just basis on the color of their skin. It's actually giving a job to the qualified people, black people in this case, because they weren't given the opportunities because they're qualified, just because they're black. It seemed like for the last 60 years, the only people who complied with that policy was the federal government. They didn't hire these black people because they were black. They hired them because they were qualified. Let me say that again. The the federal government enacted these affirmative action laws and policies that were put in place to take black people into consideration who were qualified. So today we see the situation where the federal government was the only one that complied with that law. Not only that, they didn't enforce that the private sector ensure that they were upholding the policy. So at the end of the day, we're still in a situation where the federal government has the highest percent of black employees because they're the only ones complying with their own law, and they're not ensuring that the private sector companies who operate in their country that they have policy over were doing that, right? So we're in a situation where the Social Security Administration and many other federal agencies are the highest percentage of black workers, and the private sector still lagging behind because they just like, we ain't finna hire no black people. Alright? We're just gonna find different cute ways not to be able to hire them, which is fine. Good. Black people need their own to build their own jobs anyway. But that's not the topic here. We're talking about Donald Trump and the erosion of the black middle class and why this is actually a state of emergency. Let's go back to the imagery here. This is the bill of goods that they sold us. A lot of us took these federal jobs trying to achieve this, what we saw here. They sold this 45 to 60-year-old shout out, right? You remember you used to go to the club, 30 and over, throw your hands, 45 and to 60, throw your hands, because this was our childhood right here. Right? Okay.
You're a fucking
Let's
fraud.
come back
You
here.
call them because you or your loved one lost their social security check and you're complaining about.
You know, a lot of these are Democrat rants. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. Again, there are different variations of the devil. Good devil, bad devil, right? Good cop, bad cop. Here we go. So, impacts of federal job cuts on retirement security, retirement vulnerability. Uh-oh. Remember the lady on Good Times that was eating cat food and everybody didn't want to eat the food, the casserole she had cooked because they thought that she put cat food in there. And has anybody seen the price of cat food? Whoever thought that eating cat food because you didn't have any money was a thing? Because cat food is more expensive than regular food. But I digress. The cat food eating woman is in every black neighborhood today. The cat food eating man, I'm talking symbolically, no one is eating cat food. But we're talking about the poverty associated with retirement here. That is becoming, and it probably has been a thing for about 20 years among black people. We have a crisis of elderly people who don't have money. And we also have a crisis, and that is becoming more and more the case. But we also have a crisis where the only black people that have money are the old people now. I'm talking about black people. But let's talk about those two different things. The Social Security Administration jobs often include defined benefit pensions, a critical resource for black workers who face 1/8 the median wealth of white households and limited access to private retirement plans. And I'm going to digress here, if you had started out with a student loan, you're starting adulthood at a deficit. Matter of fact, you're starting life at a deficit because you're not inheriting anything. You're born to these parents who are just getting by. You just get by and you did your best, you excelled, you got good grades, you went to university. Now you have to start adulthood at a deficit. Then you might luck up, you get a situation where you get a federal job. You're like, oh man, Johnny's doing good. He got a federal job. He got good benefits, right? He worked there. He worked there for 30 years. All he has is that pension from Social Security because he had to pay those student loans and other things like that. So luckily, Johnny worked there, and as he was getting paid and compensated, they were taking out his pension money for him. He didn't have much room outside of that to explore private retirement opportunities, and he has to compete with people who got an inheritance from birth, who had their schools paid for. I'm talking about college, so they didn't have student loans. They may have gotten help on a down payment for a house, so their mortgage was low. So those people you have to compete against were able to explore private retirement plans. And that's where you get into a situation where people have $5 million to $10 million to retire on, and they're still jumping off of roofs because they think that's not enough. Workforce reductions or pension cuts could force retirees into poverty, especially as Black seniors already experience higher rates of economic insecurity. So we have a situation where in these, I think it's been about 30 years, because my grandmother lived in one of these buildings where low income for elderly people or people with disabilities. And in a lot of these Black neighborhoods, those buildings are worse than the projects. I don't want to get into that because it's some ugly things. But those senior buildings, in many cases, are worse than the projects, the things that go on over there, because that's a vulnerable population. And you have all type of vultures and hyenas and predators that hang around trying to get a piece of those people. But you've had about, for the last 30 years, where these buildings started going up. So it's almost like those low income senior housing buildings, this was an issue for Black people for 30 years plus. So if they went up 30 years ago, 35 years ago, that means it probably was a problem for a whole 20 years. So it seems like we've had a crisis of our elderly in poverty for 50 years, which probably justifies Good Times having that episode. That probably was an issue at that time, which was about 50 years ago. You see, the math is mathing there. So if those buildings went up 20, 30, 35 years, and that issue had been going on for 20 years, 50 years, or 55, 60, what have you. Because normally what happens, you have people that are crying in the streets for 20 years, and then all of a sudden the right person gets in there like, okay, let's do something about it. It's been 20 years, for crying out loud, right? That's how long it takes. The reparations movement has been going on for 100 years, and we still ain't got reparations. But that's just normally how things work. So be patient with that. So workforce reductions or pension cuts. Yeah, pension cuts. You don't want that. Because at least if you're at least under 70 years old, you can still try to eke out enough labor to have a living. Once you hit 70 and you have nothing in the bank, God help you. Because you don't have the energy to do what it takes to just put food on the table. and you start seeing this, Houston, we got a problem. Um, Especially as black seniors already experience higher rates of economic insecurity, premature retirement risks, job cuts may push older black SSA employees into early retirement with reduced benefits, exacerbating reliance on Social Security payments that are often insufficient. Displacement into gig or low wage work undermines decades of retirement planning tied to federal careers. So you thought, I got 30 years in, I'm vested, I got retirement, and you're still gonna have to rely on Social Security because Medicare Part D doesn't cover your prescription or the full amount. You gotta pay $500 out of pocket because you're in the donut hole, or you need to meet your deductible. This is retirement. And hey, let's go back to this picture because I gotta remind you. Remember, we're on 30 and over people, 45 to 60 people. Throw your hands up. Let me hear you something. Let me hear you say something here. Remember these pictures? You got to start planning now. This is from our youth, our tender youth. We ain't so tender anymore, right? We're old, and we got to start planning for that. And the prospects, Gen X is not going to age very well. I fear for that generation. This is going to be us. This article is not talking about old people today. It's talking about old people tomorrow. You that were children watching these images. This is going to be you. Pay attention. And you're going to have the vultures and the hyenas hanging around you, looking to suck your blood, take from you, because you're going to be vulnerable and old. Do it today. Do something today while you still have the energy and the power to do so. You're in the prime of your life. You have the wisdom and the cumulative knowledge to know that these images don't work for you anymore. They never did and never will. We can't fool ourselves anymore.
You're a fucking fraud.
So let's get back here.
Because you or your love.
Social Security Administration. Just one. We didn't get to the big one. Social Security is one of them. That's just today's news. We're going to go down to the big one. Threats to the black middle class. Wealth erosion. Loss of Social Security Administration jobs weakens a key pillar of black middle class stability, reversing progress and closing racial wealth gaps. So we had all of one generation to get some of these benefits. So that's the generation after the end of Jim Crow, which was about 1955, that came of age in the 70s and 80s, got these good federal jobs, got the good civil service jobs in the government or government-related, public works, sanitation, city, state, local, parks and recreation, right? One generation that was able to enjoy this. And that gave rise to these black images that we saw here. Like, okay, we're going to give them... Hey, okay, let's talk about the joke from I'm Going to Get You Sucker. I love to say it. I said it with Brother Safiwe on Transatlantic. So you remember the scene in I'm Gonna Get You Sucker where Slade, I don't remember, Keenan Ivory Wayne's character goes to the Black Panther headquarters at the time. And he goes there because he wants to try to get an army to challenge the man. And This is the one for those of you that really remember the movie. This is one where I think Jan Brady was his wife. So it was ironic that this former Black Panther had become a swirler, right? He had a white wife with white kids. They had the bean pie and the bean soda, a bean pie perhaps, bean soda, and all that stuff. But the satire and all of that was that. So Keenan Ivory Wayne's character goes in and says, "Well, what happened to you? You used to be 1,000 strong. We used to really look up to you." And the guy says, "One day, it was the late 60s, and we went to protest in front of the federal building. We were protesting for our rights. And then at one moment, they opened the door, and they all got jobs. And that was the end of the movement." So, at the end of the day, it was satire, but this is really what happened. I just wanted to illustrate that this is the generation that came of age during the late 60s, 70s, 80s, that were able to kind of enjoy the jobs, right? And create this black middle class that Ebony magazine decided to sell us these images, right? I guess they were trying to tell us, look, you've been militant in the 50s and 60s, right? We saw you march and protest and get water hosed, your march on Washingtons and stuff like that. But this is how you be American. Look at these pictures of good, clean-cut black people. You have the federal jobs now. We opened the doors. We let you into the Social Security Administration. And now we know you have this. So instead of buying into a dissonant lifestyle, instead of protesting us, embrace the imagery here. And a lot of us did. And a lot of us that were born, not coming of age, around the time we were born to parents who enjoyed this imagery too, and tried to achieve this imagery also. And then they added on top of that with Hillman College and school days. And we saw these images too. Our parents took subscriptions to these magazines. Quite as cap side note, I was actually on the back of Ebony Jet and Essence magazine when I was in high school. But that's another thing for another day. But yeah, Black Enterprise, Jet, Essence. And then they came to us with Right On, Word Up magazine with more imagery. Let's get back to it.
Fraud. If you call...
So, racialized labor barriers. Black workers face persistent hiring, promotion biases in the private sector, making federal cuts a dual threat to employment and equity. Retention gaps in federal leadership roles, example given, low black representation in Social Security Administration management, limit career advancement opportunities. So you got these black people in these positions as a claim specialist for 100 years. You 60 years old taking advice from your 20-year-old white manager. Know the job because you've been on that job for 50 years, and you got to take orders from a 20-year-old white person that just got out of college. That happens all over the place. They're talking to these black people like children. So that's the Social Security Administration. Here's the big black employer here, the Postal Service. Again, this was the last of the great ones here, where you have the situation where if you were a black Gen X, right? You came of age in the 80s and 90s, and even up to the 2000s. And you just graduated high school. You didn't feel like going to college, or maybe you had a daughter or son young, and you needed to get this thing called life underway. You just had to get this thing started. There was no time to spend 4 years in college. Your parents already don't have money. You already don't have an inheritance. So you just got to get it started. At the very least, you could go down to the post office, fill out an application. You got a job for life. And young people are seeing that these opportunities are not available to us as they once were. So let's take a look at it. Post office. The U.S. Postal Service has long been a critical source of stable, unionized jobs for Black Americans, especially during the 20th century when racial discrimination limited private sector opportunities. Again, the federal government is the only employment or the only agency or entity within the United States that are honoring and complying with their own labor laws, and they're not requiring the private sector to comply either. Economic stability and mobility. The United States Postal Service jobs offered competitive wages, benefits, and job security, enabling Black workers to build wealth, purchase homes, and invest in education for their children. By the 1970s, Black workers represented over 20% of postal employees, far exceeding their share in the private sector. Unions like the National Alliance of Postal and Federal Employees fought for equitable pay, promotions, and protections against workplace discrimination. Collective bargaining helped narrow racial wage gaps and ensured fair treatment compared to many private industries. Civil rights connection. Postal work became intertwined with the civil rights movement as economic empowerment through federal jobs bolstered community activism and political engagement. High-profile figures, including Malcolm X and former postal workers, linked postal employment to broader struggles for racial justice. Excuse me. Decline of USPS threatens progress. Policies like the 2006 Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act, PAEA, which imposed unsustainable financial mandates, have weakened the United States Postal Service and led to job cuts. Privatization efforts and reduced mail volume disproportionately endanger Black workers who remain overrepresented in postal roles compared to other sectors. Impact on the Black middle class. The erosion of United States Postal Service jobs risks reversing decades of economic gains, exacerbating wealth gaps in Black communities. Postal employment remains a vital lifeline in regions with limited alternatives, underscoring its role in sustaining intergenerational stability. So we have a situation where Black postal workers today face challenges like automation and political attacks on public institutions, mirroring broader struggles for racial economic equity. Preserving USPS is framed as both a racial justice issue and a defense of the public sector's role in reducing inequality. Brothers and sisters, we have gone back in time to Jim Crow. We are on the cusp of Jim Crow. And if we're not careful, on the cusp of slavery. And I'm not someone that's putting this on Donald Trump. I'm putting this on us now, because fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Right? So we can't. This started before Donald Trump. I don't even understand how people can see Trump and they can't see George Bush. Like, did we forget there was a George W. Bush? That guy was horrible. But I digress. I want to close this out with Antonio Moore, because I think he really has a grasp on this topic. Although he is a millennial, he is someone who really grasps the topic, an older millennial. He breaks it down from an economic and sociological standpoint. And I just want to just send it out because I think it's poignant, where he's basically saying that when these black baby boomers die, there will be black wealth in America will be zero. Because these are the people en masse who worked at the Postal Service, who worked at Social Security, who worked in all of these civil service jobs that created the images that we see here. These were the people that these images were marketed to. Now, we as Gen X, the 45 to 60-year-olds, we saw these images, but we weren't buying the subscriptions. The people that were buying the subscriptions were the people that were the workers at the time, which were our parents, our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents, who were those Social Security employees, those postal worker employees who are now retired or retiring. And what Antonio is going to say,
lesson, I have to talk about it in the context.
And what Antonio is going to say is that once that generation dies, black wealth goes to zero. And at that point, who is going to keep the hyenas, the vultures, and the wolves off of you when your wealth is zero? You're not going to be able to stunt your way out of this one. When people smell blood in the water, you become prey to them. Who is going to keep the wolves off of us then, if we don't stand up now? Let's go into it.
Context of what many of you were raised in. My mama was basically damn near a Gen Xer. She basically, as a result, didn't participate in any of the privileges, advantages, and things that many of your parents got to take part in. Well, in many ways, as a result, I didn't get the things and the soccer practices and all that stuff y'all had. But what's going to happen now for many of you that are 40 to 50 years old is your parent won't be able to do the adult things it takes to really make you an American in terms of the American dream, which is transfer that wealth. Some of that's going to be due to choice. They just don't give a And then y'all, you know, you got people out here who mama voted for Trump asking them for money. You got people out here who mama and daddy got a house, but they not going to leave it to them. They just going to spend it all on a vacation. And you got to reconcile where that's at. And then there's a lot of y'all who mama and daddy never had no wealth. And you can't miss that window what happened during the boomer era, because now this is hibernation period. So we're going to talk about what I mean as I get into the data. The reason I have this up on your screen is this is the image of the post-Nixonian black capitalism lie, which I'll discuss later, in Reaganomics, that led to the imagery of the Huxtables and the Bill Cosby. I showed you 8 years ago, how that didn't make no sense. This
is where I kind of get the idea. I want to give credit to Tone on this one. This is the idea, right? The imagery that was sold to us, and also shout out to Dr. Jared Ball, right? It's unfortunate that they haven't been able to dialogue on a few things. There are some nuances in what they believe, but I think there is synergy here. With the myth of black buying power and Tone's concept of black wealth illusion, right? This is these are the images that we were sold, and they was largely sold to those postal workers and those social security workers, those federal workers that were at the purchasing power back then.
In a $9 million brownstone that they would have had to buy for somewhere around $1,800,000 in the early 80s when the wealthiest black people were buying $200,000 homes. So they gave you fantasy. They gave you the butler. They gave you the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and they gave you the family that had the butler, and they didn't tell you that.
Here's why you got to put the imagery under a microscope, right? So Philip Banks on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was a judge. I don't know any judges that can afford mansions in Bel-Air with a stay-at-home wife, but I digress. You think about what these things that these unrealistic things that these people have sold you.
The real Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was a white family with a guy named Benny Medina, who was an immigrant living in their back house or whatever. All right. There wasn't no black family like that. But what it did is it created this visual of this new black middle class and of this black person that had arrived, right? And that's these people now. And you also had this narrative of being entirely self-interested, telling your kids that there is a will, never showing it to them. Let me say that again. Telling your kids that there is inheritance, never showing it to them. Even telling your kids there's a college fund until it's time to go to college, and then you don't give them no fund. So now they got student loans, and you're saying why you got student loans. Well, part of it is because you didn't have no fund, and another part is because you didn't do no politics. Let's talk about it today. So we hear now in the black baby boomers, many not that well educated, were able to take advantage of the ride up. What ride up? There was a slight ride up that happened as the crumbs fell off of the white table and they signed up for policy. I talked to you guys about Prop 13 here in Los Angeles. There is no way that black families should have signed up for Prop 13 to help white people hide their tax advantages that they were building into their homes. And now you up there eating fires, crying, but you didn't pay for your taxes on that $1 million house. And all the other black people didn't have no services. Or for that matter, we look at Trump's tax cuts, and I want you to go read the articles. They talking about cutting Medicaid. You know what they talking about not cutting? Medicare. Medicare is for the old people. So as long as I'm okay, then everything's all right. Okay. All right. So here we are. Somebody said they don't even be having life insurance policies. And we're not talking about, when my grandmama died, I didn't even know that well. I had to put up 3 racks to bury her.
Remember I talked about that earlier, right? How many times we're in a situation where my uncle was sitting up for 2 weeks after he passed away before they had enough money to be able to bury him in the situation, right? America's a place where we pay premium price for basic services as black people. Again, premium price for basic services as black people. Everyone else pays a discount price and gets premium services, but we have to pay a premium price for basic services out here.
I say I didn't know that well. I might have met her 10 times and talked to her 10 minutes each time, 20 minutes each time. What I'm saying to you is that we are at a point now where money don't flow up, and we are being left with the consequence of a lifetime of bad choices. Let's talk about it. Let's get personal. 310-388-3499 if you want to call in and give your testimony. I want to talk about wealth today. You see this look.
This is not victim blaming. No one is putting all of this on black people. But what you must do for that generation that saw those images, the 45 to 60-year-olds, you must become engaged or perish.
So boom, right here, all black wealth, all black boomer wealth. We're gonna make sure them pensions is okay and get fortified. We're gonna make sure that our house has the Prop 13 tax exemption, but we're not gonna do nothing about them student loans. We're not gonna have no child care credits for middle wage to high wage black people that don't have no assistance. Okay. So when you look at this chart, look how white people are taking off. I've shown it to you before, but this is real, because the reason stuff is expensive is because it's not expensive. They just lying to you. It's just you don't get no transfer. We don't live on labor alone anymore. In fact, that's not even the main ingredient. It's an additive. The main ingredient, if you live good in America, is transfers, period.
What he's saying here is that income is not enough alone, right? Income from your labor is not enough alone to live in America, because the vast majority of the jobs don't compensate you enough to cover rent alone, in addition to the other expenses that you have. You need a little something extra, like an inheritance or a wealth transfer, generational wealth transfer, to be able to survive in America. That's just how it is right now. So if you haven't been able to figure out why your bills can't meet your income can't meet yours financially, because this is the new reality in America. You need that wealth transfer, that bump, just to be able to make ends meet, and then some.
And anybody that's not telling you that don't know nothing about living good in America. Well, I'll get into details later on with an article out of Forbes that talks about the sneaky ways that white boomers are helping their children that are 40 years old, that are 50 years old. Are you getting help, or are you giving people $3,000 at the end? Okay, we here. So everybody that's in here probably has something that they dealing with at home. They probably have something where you become grandmama and mama for somebody that wasn't grandmama and mama. Okay. But while you're doing that, for you to understand the calamity of your situation, you not only have to understand it's over and there will be no black wealth, but what life looks like after that. And so you don't blame yourself. And also how you going to look across that world and you're going to see other people who life don't look like yours because they did get what they were supposed to get. This money that white wealth people have right here, I notice it stops in 2021. It's going to keep growing. They're going to get to 150, 175, $200 trillion in wealth. And black people will go from this and it will collapse down because there's been no politics that supports American descendants of slavery or black people at large. And we here now.
So what do you get, essentially, when you have a situation where this blue line here, which represents white wealth, is going up exponentially, and then black people are down here below this red line, or about this red line, and that goes down, and the top blue one goes up, right? What do you get? You get a situation where you're damn near a slave. I'm telling you, that's what it is, right? It's time for the adults in the room to have a conversation about this. Let's look down the line, right? Tone is calling this a calamity. I'm calling this, you will forever be in bondage to people who are on this blue line here. And I know he said something about a lifetime of bad choices. This is not bad choices in terms of you took too many trips to Vegas. You bought too many Jordans. You wear Gucci belts. That's not the bad choice. The bad choice is you were not engaged in your plight enough. It wasn't enough to work hard. You needed adults in the room who were telling you that these things are coming and no one did. And it wasn't enough to get off work and watch Def Comedy Jam. It wasn't enough to get off work and do Cat Williams. It wasn't enough to do birthday parties, anniversaries, weddings. It wasn't enough. Not saying don't do those things, but you also have to be engaged politically into the process, into policy. Like Tone often says, you must do politics. Whether it's American politics or international politics, you must be concerned. You can't watch live streams like his and Yvette's and other people who are doing political things and say, I don't want to hear that black stuff. Who does that? The consequences of you not doing black stuff is this blue line and this red line. That's the consequence of you not being concerned.
There's levels to this conversation. For those people that will say they don't know what I'm talking about, this is what I'm talking about. And this is everyday white man. A friend of mine told me his daughter graduated Bucknell University. In the chat, how many people heard of Bucknell? That means
Bucknell is a private school, an expensive private school. I think it's in Pennsylvania or Indiana.
anywhere USA University. He didn't say Harvard. He didn't say Princeton. He didn't say UCLA. He said Bucknell. Now, I'm not trying to put Bucknell down, but this is all across America, the cost you pay to have a child that graduates from a high-end university. That's your bill, Black Boomer. Did you pay it or not? Because if you didn't pay it, they gonna have to pay it, and their life not gonna be good.
This is what I've been saying. So if you have to graduate from a university with 5 to 6 figures in student loans, they told us to do it, 45 to 60-year-olds. It wasn't the right thing to do. They put us in a workforce where we competed against other non-blacks who didn't have student loan debt. Whose life is going to be better? Because working hard is not going to, alone, is not going to help you overcome this.
Because it's not built for them to pay it. Oh, what you talking about, Tom? Friend of mine told me his daughter graduated Bucknell University, and he spent $360,000 on her education their last 4 years. She majored in animal behavior, and now she's living at home making $18 an hour at an amusement park. She at home and she good, and she gonna inherit that house. What you gonna inherit? I told you about my grandmama when my mom.
So it's not even funny, right? Because I bet you that dad is not complaining. This goes back to the point that America is not about income. And white people fundamentally understand this, right? It's not about income, right? Go to college because that's what you're supposed to do. Here's $360,000, right? It's not, you don't sit down and say that's stupid, because they know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing, right? Here you have black people pushing, you hear the Nigerians, you have to be a doctor, engineer, right? Because it's like, look, we got to milk this college thing for everything it's worth. And here white people are chilling, drinking, sexing their college life away. It's an experience, right? It's the new high school diploma, animal behavior. Because they know at the end of the day, they're like, what am I going to struggle for? I'm going to get this $1 million house. It's already bought and paid for. My dad had $360,000 to drop. I just take that money, flip it into a lifestyle. I just find my life passion. I'll scale that hobby into something that I can monetize. And not only that, with the $18 an hour job that girl has, right? She'll still have enough money to give her children.
Mama died. She left me payday loan cards with nothing in them. I don't expect nothing to be in them. You cannot be here and be comfortable and build lives that are comfortable where it isn't felt by your partner, where it isn't felt by your children in this America without transfers that support you. I want y'all to understand, I'm going to get real with you. Many of you say to yourself, if I had become a lawyer, well, I'm a lawyer. Many of you say to yourself, if I had become a doctor, if I had went to UCLA, I'm here to take the I out because that makes you feel strong. Like Popeye with that spinach. I'm here today to slow this thing down and explain to you that what will happen in the next several years, and it's already here for many of you, is that there will be no black wealth as black boomers pass on, and I will show you in specifics what I mean. Okay.
All right, let's go back
in the
to
chat. I know it's going to be a lot of people listening. Many of you will say, well, these other channels get Mr. Beast or Tariq get all these views because he's talking about who dating who. He talking about a game show. We sitting up in here gonna have 1,000 people talking about data. Tell me where you see that at. And I'm not saying I created this data. I'm saying that I am explaining it in a very applicable way that has needed to be done for black folks for a generation. Grandma know. Grandma know. Let me play something for you that gives this an anchoring. I want you to listen to this black grandma talk about what she gonna do with her money when she pass on. Let me play it.
A dream can become a reality. It was a struggle for me to own it, but it was worth it.
Good morning.
By the early 1990s, Miss Plowden, who worked at St. Paul's Church, finally could afford to buy a home of her own. How much did you pay for your home? Do you remember?
Yes, I do remember. It was $120,000.
And what is your home worth now?
Over $500,000.
So when you pass on and you leave that to your children, you're leaving an estate.
Yes, I am, but I don't intend to leave them a paid-for house. I intend to enjoy my money and my house.
So she said she's not gonna leave that house. She already ain't gonna leave no money. She gonna enjoy her money in her house, but we still going to Thanksgiving. Okay. While this white man said he
Hey, catch that one. Told is like, look, and for white people, it's like, if I hear that I'm not in the will, we don't talk no more. You are not my mother anymore, right? Like, life is like that, right? Like, real life. You can choose to not live in this world if you want to. With white folks, it's like, look, if you're not willing me in a world where generational wealth is part of the plan, I have to be able to count on that. Because if I'm not able to count on that, I am nothing. I am nobody. If you can't leave me something in your will, Mom, I'm not coming to Thanksgiving. I'm not coming to no holiday. I don't hear nothing you got to say until you put me in that will. With that $350,000 I got coming to.
paid $360,000 for his kid to go to college and then let her live at home while she make $18 an hour. Okay. Part of the reality of this show is to explain to you that you are not living in America, you are living under it. And that you can be living in the same house with a grandma that waves by to you as you go drive Uber and she gone to sleep. And you telling me, well, what she could have done, what could she do about it? What she was supposed to do about it was 20, 30 years ago. That's already been decided. Okay. Here we go. Part of the reason I showed that video is to give a greater context. The white man says, well, you can leave some inheritance. And she said, I don't intend to leave nothing. I'm going to enjoy it. All right. This is while this is happening. The great wealth transfer isn't 72 trillion, but rather 129 trillion. B of A says, and the government gave most of it. B of A says, and the government gave most of it to baby boomers. You've probably heard, let me slow down. The government gave baby boomers money. They allowed them to grow it with policies that allowed them to have reduced taxation in old age, reduced taxation based on timing. Prop 13, go look it up in California, capped the property taxes after 78 based on when you purchase it and only go up 2%. So they created an inherent advantage for boomers and then kicked the can down the road. They made it so their college was free. Then allowed them to bankrupt anything that they had left over. Then changed that in the 90s so that anybody after that can't bankrupt the loans. The reason bankruptcy is important isn't about irresponsibility. It's about making sure that you give out responsible loans. I'll talk about that later. It's about making sure you have negotiation leverage when they don't want to work with you. Oh, I can bankrupt this. Oh, let me see if I can make a better payment. You can't bankrupt it. They treat that like it's IRS debt. Okay, now you see where I'm going. You've probably heard about the great wealth transfer. It's the 72 trillion stack of assets that baby boomers are sitting on and going to pass on to millennials someday. Well, it's no longer someday. That day is today. Part of the reason that...
So we're not going to go much more into that. Hopefully you got the gist of this entire talk. We are in an actual state of emergency, family. Everything has been a lie. Everything that we were sold. It's time for us to get smarter. It's time for us to become engaged. It's not enough to say, I don't want to hear any negative news. Why you always got to be negative? Why? I don't want to hear that. We got to get out of that mood. If we need psychological help, we need psychological help. But this moodiness as it relates to hearing the truth about what is going on with us must end. Because we are in a position where the shackles are finna be put right back on all of us. No matter how much you scratch your head, moonshine, and shuffle, it's about to be put back on all of us, family, with love. And I don't want to see that happen. Right? It's like, no, that can't happen. White folks won't let that happen. Do you see what this man is doing? Here, let's look back again. You see what this man is doing? Like, the only good jobs that black people have. This ain't about him. I could go back. I could do a whole thing on Bush. I could do a whole thing on Obama. I can do a whole thing on your first black president, Bill Clinton. This is not party politics, party divided line. This is not somebody to get in here that's on the Democratic bandwagon talking about, that's right, we should have never voted, and then screw all them people. Because all the parties are responsible for this, right? You got people panicking at the Social Security Administration, right now. Their only path to middle class to live a half decent life. And as Tone said, we're living under America. And as I'm saying, we live a basic life for a premium price. It's not worth it. It's not worth blood, sweat, and tears just to come up empty every single time. So with that said, family, this is your boy Afro Descendant Ali. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you can, please support the Cash App. This channel has been demonetized, so we've never really received anything from YouTube on this at all. But it's something that we've done as a labor of love. for 3 years, myself and some of the other brothers here. So with that said, we just want to continue to do this work and bring this information and get better at this. And we want to continue to bring news that no one else is bringing you. You know, we don't care about the big U news. We don't care about Just Hilarious on the Breakfast Club. None of that. We just want to be straightforward and direct and bring this information to you because we're in a dire position right now. And it's really not looking good. Sorry for the sad message, but not sorry. Peace, love, and blessings to everyone. Become engaged